admonition of an old-timer this week. It's anyone who can remember the time when you winterized your car by putting it on blocks until next spring. And, that does not fit my category at all, but I have heard tell of that. And there was a little girl, and she was pondering her future. So she decided to ask her mom. She said, if I get married, she said, will I have a husband like Papa? Mom says, yes, dear. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, if I don't get married, will I be an old maid like Aunt Susan? Mom says, yep. And the girl said, wait a minute. She shook her head. Boy, I am in a fix. Kids say the craziest things. I hear them every once in a while on the bus, as you folks can attest to here. And they're just really something. But I always enjoy what the young folks say, because it's always original, and it's a lot of fun to listen to. Sometimes I have to stop the bus and laugh for a second because I can't go on any farther. The focus of my thoughts that I would like to share with you this morning are in the book of Ecclesiastes in chapter 3, verses 1 to 11. The title of my theme this morning is Rhythms and Cycles. To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under heaven. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck up that which is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to get and a time to lose. A time to keep, a time to cast away. A time to rend and a time to sow. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time of war and a time of peace. What profit hath he that worketh in that wherein he laboureth? I have seen the travail which God hath given to the sons of men to be exercised in it. He hath made everything beautiful in his time. Also, he hath set the world in their heart, so that no man can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning to the end. These are just verses we've all very familiar with. I like to read them once in a while because they always bring things into a sense of balance. You feel things going on around you, the situation in the world. We certainly look like we're in for a time of war. And we see these things, and God has a balance to all things. But in everything that God has set forth, there is cycles and there are rhythms. And I found this, as I was thinking this past week, is really interesting. And it's a subject that you could talk about probably all day, or you could think about as you carry it through. But anything that moves or has life, whether it's made by God or mankind, has cycles and rhythms in its life and in its movement. Everything. There isn't anything that has life that has not some sort of a cycle or a rhythm connected with it. Now that's be it whether man-made or made by God. We'll get into that in a little bit. But all of these overlap one another, as you'll see in a few minutes. Nothing stands out alone by itself, but everything is overlapped and interlocked, if you will. one with another. And as you see these things, you can't help but recognize a master builder, a planner. Whether it be God or whether it be man and his machines or whatever it is that he's put together. There's still cycles and rhythms. And we can begin, of course, with the biggest example we have is our universe outside. Planets and all those things, miraculously in their courses and remaining there. Thought crossed my mind from some of the problems we might have. We send all that space junk up there. You know, metal has a tendency to create a diverse effect on magnetic fields. We've certainly got a lot of it sitting around the Earth's area, don't we? Just a side thought. But our universe with all the planets is one example. We have another examples of our annual cycle every year with the 4 seasons. This continues. And it moves. And this cycle moves within the realm of the universe cycle of all the planets and stuff. Here, this one is going in with that one. And it's all working in different ways. We're in the fall now, aren't we? Autumn. We're very close to winter. We're starting that cycle. In this part of the country, that's a necessary cycle so that everything can also have its little cycle within it and its rhythm. If we all of a sudden quit having snows, which some of us, I know, we've had a pretty good week this past week. I've enjoyed it. And you often think, boy, if we could just have the whole year like this, we'd be all right. But we really wouldn't be all right because we would lose certain things in the nature around us that is required and is kept going through the 4 seasons that we have. That's our annual cycle. We have the cycle of the moon each month. We're all familiar with that. Look at the calendar and there it is. Most people in the world today don't pay too much attention to the moon anymore. But it has its purpose. And God set it there for a purpose. Not only just to light the night, but to mark times, etc. And it has its cycles within the moon. Within its complete cycle, it has the different phases, as we call them. The new moon, the first quarter, the full moon, and the last quarter. And all of these, again, continuously, right now, are in progress. The seasons are in progress. The universe is in progress. And it's all moving. And the one we're the most familiar with, and the reason we're here this morning, is the weekly cycle, isn't it? The Sabbath day. The 1 day in 7. The 7th day. That God set apart for His people to enjoy all that He has for them. We have our weekly cycle. And here again, that is also then going on continuously. The rhythms of the week. And then this day is set aside. The rhythm tends to change a little, doesn't it? And our bodies, as they are, they need that change. And they welcome that change because it puts us also, as spiritually as well as physically, set up for next week. Our bodies were designed for that kind of a rhythm. Kind of foolish for the person to say the weekly cycle was ever forgotten about or done away with, wouldn't it? Because it's against man's own body. It's meant to be that way. I know sometimes Friday night comes around, I get so used to it sometimes after supper, I'm ready to go to bed. My system is adjusted to that over the years. And you're ready to relax and you really take a good rest. And so then Sabbath, you rest your mind on things pertaining to God and His Word. And get it away from the weekly events and the worldly things that continue to go on. We don't have to pay too much attention to them on the Sabbath day. Well, these are things that God has set in motion. And we're all familiar with them, and they reflect God. There's something we can look at in our daily lives every day and say, yes, Lord, you did all this. And we can witness those things as we watch the various cycles and rhythms of the nature around us. But let's think of some man-made items, if you will, that also have cycles and rhythm. Of course, one of the things I was familiar with a few years ago was the old 4-cycle engine. Now, most of us here aren't mechanics, I'm sure, but some of us know exactly what I'm talking about. The old gasoline engine that has 4 cycles. And those cycles are necessary for that engine to function. The creators knew that, the designers, and they set it up. And for those of you who aren't too familiar, I'm going to give you just a little demonstration. I'd like you to pretend for a minute that my arm and fist and so forth is the piston with the connecting rod, if you will, okay, to the crankshaft. Now it goes around like this, okay, up and down in its position. Each turn, each 180 degrees is a cycle. It starts out on what we call top dead center. And as it starts to move on the first cycle down, a valve, or in the new engines you've got 2 valves. They open up and they allow the proper mixture of fuel and air to come on into that cylinder. It sucks it in. And when that reaches the bottom, the valves close. That piston comes back up the other side. It's producing now compression. When it hits up to its proper place on the top, the spark plug ignites it. If it's diesel, it's ignited by combustion, by sheer combustion, or pressure. But the spark plug ignites it, and that's the second cycle, which begins the third, which is your power stroke, they call that. And that brings the power to drive that motor. And so that drives it down. Now you've got the gases and all that's used up in there, and you come back on your 4th cycle, which pushes up, the exhaust valves open up, and that pushes out the exhaust out of that cylinder on top. And so this continues going like this, and you have your engine working. But it's a series of cycles and rhythms to produce the engines that we depend on every day of our life. It's very simple when it's understood, and yet when you sit and watch it run, if you don't understand it, it's awful complicated looking. But the basic design of it is very simple. And so we have the engine, a 4-cycle engine. There's 2 cycles now, which is just cut in half is all it amounts to. But they are what powers our cars, aren't they? And how many cars do we see on the highway? Each one having its own rhythm and its own set of cycles and moving. There used to be a saying, I used to hear it, I think my dad used to say it, you want to go break in a new car. You want to get a new car, you're going to break it in. Another saying was that I remember was, the car's not broke in until you have about 20,000 miles on it, or so. Maybe it was less than that years ago. But, you know, I got to thinking about that. And really, you don't break a car in. It breaks you in. And get right down to it, because we have to learn how to drive that machine in the manner it was designed to be driven. Because if we fail to do it properly, we're not going to have it very long, are we? So in a sense, it really breaks us in. The parts may wear in a little bit, and that's what was meant by breaking the car in. But it's not like a horse. You don't break it to your will. You've got to bend your will to conform to the way that it will operate. So we have these things with cycles and rhythms in our cars. How many have seen the TV camera on the news and watched the San Francisco or the New York traffic going home in the afternoon? What a system. what a massive amount of movement going on these highways. These fellows here are very familiar with that, I'm sure. They're in the middle of it most every day, I imagine. The traffic flow on a highway, that has its rhythm. That has a pace that has to be maintained. You know, they post the speed limit. I remember a fellow one time, he got stopped. He was in the left lane, and he was doing the speed limit, but he was a hazard. He was out of step with the rhythm of the traffic. He was not in tune with what was going on around him. And legally, he was right, but practically speaking, he was wrong. And the policeman told him, you have to keep up with the traffic if you're going to be in that lane. I don't care what it's posted, because now you're creating a hazard. And so, the traffic flow on our highway has its rhythm. We have to find that out when we get there. We don't make it adapt to ourselves. We have to adapt to it, don't we? So that we can be safe and travel safe. You see that pattern flow, and you see somebody who's not doing it right from the air, and all of a sudden you see congestion and stuff flying all over down there. It comes from getting out of the flow, getting away from the rhythm of the travel. There's rhythms in machinery. We talked a little bit about the engine, but put the whole thing together. You have a full machine, and that machine has rhythms that man has made. The press that we have at the publishing house has a special rhythm to it. Every piece of machinery, wherever it is, has that same unique rhythm to its own. And the operator has to adjust himself to that rhythm and listen to it and pay attention. Because you can miss something. If you miss something important, well, I don't think we need to go into what could happen. It could be very costly. From years ago when I used to drive truck, the big 18-wheelers, they had rhythm. They had a special sound. Each one was different. I only know one that I drove. But they used to have transmissions that didn't have synchromesh like they have today. And so you had to, by the tachometer and by the feel of the outfit, you made your shift. Woe be unto you if you made it wrong. Because if you weren't paying attention, you probably wound up buying some gears for transmission gears. And they're very expensive. But they had their rhythm and their cycles. And you had to learn the noise and how they felt. And you could tell after you've been with them a while. It doesn't make any difference. Whatever that piece of machinery is, tractor, airplane, his airplane has a special rhythm. And he knows it. Or he better know it. Because, again, things can happen. And so we find that all these things that man has designed in his machinery, there are cycles and there's rhythms. Isn't it amazing? There's another rhythm that you'll know when I speak of it here. It's a rhythm in the workplace where we work each day. Each one of us works someplace, even if we're retired. We still have things to do. And there is a kind of a cycle or a rhythm in that workplace that you're at. You have to figure it out and get into that rhythm, and then it moves. At the publishing house, we have, I call it quarterly cycle, if you will. Each quarter they have to be printed. And there's a certain things that have to be flow into line to get that done. The monthly cycle of the advocate. And that has to be maintained in a continuous move. Now these are not the kind of cycles and rhythms that you see, but you feel them when you're there. He has them in the classroom. The school as a unit where he's employed has a rhythm to it. And I'm sure he senses that. And anyone who's been a teacher here would sense the same thing. You get a feel for the place you're in. You get to know it. the rhythms. This one I found kind of interesting. Team sports. That's very up right now. Football team. I think everybody here likes a good football game. And I enjoy seeing a good team. Two of them have a wonderful contest together. I think it's very good. Right now it's the New York Giants, if I'm not mistaken, who seem to be on top of the pile. Or at least right up there. And what is it about this team that makes it so good? Excuse me if I'm wrong. It's the older players who have practiced with each other so long that they know the rhythm and the technique of each player and where he's at a given time. That's what makes that team. You know, they were taking, well, you fellows are supposed to be over the hill. Well, so were the Steelers 10 years ago. But what made them what they were is because they were there long enough to know the rhythm of the movements and to know what was going on and what each other's capabilities were, and they adjusted accordingly. That's what made that team move. And that's what makes the Giants move this year. I'm just using that as an example because I saw this past week there was a little clip in one of the TV programs about the Giants, and they were talking about they had this over-the-hill group who were 30 and over considered in the pros, being too old. But they're practiced together. And knowing the rhythms of each other player is what makes it. And when that team goes out on the field, they may not even go out there with a lot of hustle in their mind. They go out there with the determination to function in a smooth flowing manner. And that's what wins the game. You can go out there and have all the hustle you want, beat your head against the wall all day long. But if you're not in tune with what's around you, you've wasted your time and effort. I can testify to that in high school. We played a co-championship game for the top position for our team. We went out there all fired up, but it was a wasted, well, I can't say wasted, it was only a 7-6 score. But we lost because we were so tuned up and hyped up that the rhythm was left behind. And the team just wasn't doing what it should have done. So I hope you understand that these things are important in every facet of our life, whatever it might be. I'm going to focus our attention now for a second on two rhythms in particular. Two cycles, call it whichever you want. The obedience to God and the disobedience to God. Because there is also a set of rhythms and cycles that again are in with the rest of things around us, aren't they? If we are in tune with God and His Word, there's a special rhythm and a series of cycles that the child will go through, or that the Son of God will go through. And the same goes vice versa. Now we have the ability to determine which we want to be a part of. Whether we want to obey God or we want to do what is and do it our way. But we find out that when we do it our way, it's just like any individual who didn't pay attention to those things that were in the rules. It didn't work right for them. It didn't come out right. So that's the traffic pattern was obstructed. Things didn't work smoothly. That goes individually as well as collectively for the body of Christ. Each one has to have themselves with God's rhythm, and if that's so, then the body itself also is with God's rhythm and cycles. You know, as individuals, we may not always see this. We may not always recognize that this is going on, but God, we can rest assured, watches these things continuously. He never takes his eyes off of his people, the body of Christ. He's looking at it continuously. And so, then we also should be looking at him. When all the parts, I'm going to take a diversion for a second, and I'm going to call it God's spiritual engine. All right? And when all the parts of his engine are working properly, the engine runs fine. The engine runs very good. As a matter of fact, it can't be beat because it has the power of God working it. There isn't anything can beat that. But if a part or parts become defective, it's just like our engine. We start to hear something. Uh-oh. That's not right. I remember one day we were running the press and it started having this, I can't even make the sound of it. It was a funny thumping sound, and it would develop and then it would go away. And it would come back and it would go away. And we racked our brains for some time trying to figure out what it was. And we came to the conclusion it has to be the different kinds of paper we have to be running through, which creates a snapping sound as it comes off the cylinder, if you will, or as it's being pulled off, because everything was perfect. But we find sometimes in just like our car engines, that they need a tune-up. They need to be brought back in tune because they go out of tune. Well, if a part becomes defective in God's engine, so to speak, God can make a tune-up, can't he? God can replace the spark plugs if it's necessary. God can put a new set of rings in if it's necessary. Grind the valves. Replace some of the bearings. It's happened before. And each one of us then is a member, if you will, or a part in this engine of God. We're all there together. And every member has the ability and the power to keep from becoming a defective part. We have that ability and the power right there available to us. Christ in you, the hope of glory. That's the power, isn't it? And if we have the will, then we can remain a good part in his engine. And the body then continues to move along on its pathway in the course of time and through God's various cycles. There's another cycle in closing. We read it in the Ecclesiastes 3rd chapter. I'm going to read another verse which has the same thing in it. I'm going to explain something. God, who at sundry times and in divers manners spake in time past unto the fathers by the prophets, hath in these last days spoken unto us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, by whom also he made the worlds. Now, in your Scofield Bible, and this is just a suggestion, I know we think sometimes worlds could be other universes. It's not an impossibility, because there is nothing impossible with God. But the margin refers to the term ages in both Ecclesiastes 3:11 and in Hebrews 1 and verse 2. Well, there are ages. We are at the end of this age, the dispensation of Jesus Christ. He's soon to return. The cycle of this one long, continuous age, approximately 2,000 years, we'll just use that as a rough estimate, is just about to come to its conclusion. We are at the very trailing edge of that cycle with its rhythms that have been going on ever since Jesus was caught away from this earth. And he's coming back again very soon. That will finalize this age. That will finalize this particular cycle that God has set in motion. So we are at the end. And what cycle and rhythm will we find ourselves when Jesus does appear? Where are we going to be in this massive humanity that's upon this earth, individually speaking? Are we going to be in the cycle that God has chosen for us and in those rhythms, or are we going to be in the cycle and rhythm that we've chosen for ourselves? And we must continue to think about these things and to keep these things before us, lest we let them slip and we are cast out. Closing verse this morning in Revelation 22:14. But I have a slightly revised thought. I'm going to read it this way, which kind of ties it in with the message. Blessed are they that keep themselves in the cycles and rhythms of obedience unto God, that they may have right to the tree of life, and may enter in through the gates into the city. May God bless you as you think on these things.